as was every other royal court's guard in attendance at the ceremony, to prevent the court from alarming all night. In light of such powerful magic, where was the court of Amber's urgent need for his services? Luca tried to hold his tongue, but he could not help himself. I am a good soldier, father. Did I not lead victoriously in battle against the Ragats come for the last 3 winters? Did I not prove myself worthy of the Dagad? You fight well, and you have the gift of the mind touch. You would not be a pride leader otherwise, Breanne replied. Then why do 5 palms of the Dahomey and the Dagad ride without me? Captain Natan chose me to join 50 of our best warriors, yet you refused his request. How have I so offended you that you would deny him the experience I could have provided? Why punish me by assigning me to the princess? Punish you by allowing you to serve at the most important ceremony of our queen's rule. Breanne shook his head, a slow smile spreading across the hard angles of his broad ebony face. Is it punishment to teach you the value of humility? Skilled soldier that you may be, you are but 19 and have much to learn. The time will come when you sicken of war. You always speak in this manner to avoid giving me the answers I need, Luca said through clenched teeth. A fanfare cut the air like a clean knife, and cheering and applause rose in the hall beyond. Then think on these answers as you serve your punishment, Breanne said, pulling him to the curtain. Should I send every good pride leader to our farthest borders and leave our high court guarded by common soldiers? What greater duty, what greater reward can there be for a soldier than to protect your sovereign? He pulled Luca close enough to whisper in his ear, I am also trying to protect you, my son. Never forget, the life you have can be taken away if someone asks the wrong questions. And people do not ask questions of the members of the royal court. Captain Kemp thrust aside the curtain, and light and warmth poured through into the narrow alcove, though not enough to counter the cold that ran under Luca's skin after his father's words. We will speak later, where there is less chance of being overheard. For now, go to our princess. By keeping her safe, you ensure your own safety. Do you understand? Throat too tight to answer or ask the questions that swirled in his head, Luca nodded, then stepped from the shadows into the light. Viella was so captivated by the change in the spacious but usually empty grand hall, she almost missed the moment Luca appeared on her right, silent and wearing glimmering armor from head to foot. Captain Kemp followed, positioning himself between the Queen's throne and Viella's. The soldier he replaced walked down the stairs to stand guard in an inconspicuous alcove. A vein pulsed in Luca's jaw, and his hand rested lightly on the hilt of his sword. The tapering point of his helmet made him look like the tip of a weapon, she thought. Light blazed from torches and candelabras set in the walls and ceilings. The floor of the hall was tiled in red and yellow mosaics depicting tiny scenes of dancers and performers. Columns rose in 2 rows on either side of the room, forming small alcoves where miniature stages featured tassa players, limbo dancers, and gatka, women stripped down to bands of cloth over their breasts and between their legs, who weaved and bent, evading swift sticks and wooden shields as they performed their warrior dance, their lean muscles glistening with gold-dusted oil as they moved. Pero grenades dressed in fluttering multicolored rags, faces painted beneath brightly colored hoods, displayed their knowledge with impudent rhymes and wordplay that made guests laugh and applaud loudly. Moko jumbies, dressed in a rainbow of tunics and pants that went down to the ground, strode above the crowd on their stilts, some dancing on one leg while holding the other above them. Most of the jumbies were teenagers, trained at a special school and fearless in their youth. In the alcove nearest the stage, a band, led by Freetown's best calypsonian, played the most popular songs in Dun on steel drums and tambu bamboo, which were bamboo stalks cut to different lengths and hit with sticks and pounded on the ground to make rhythmic beats. Down the center of the hall, Table after table made two parallel lines, dressed in flowing red and gold linen, and covered with curried meats, rotis and sadas, peas and rice, roasts, stewed and jira pork, desserts like fried crunchy kurma and milky sweet barfi, spiced prunes and candied coconut with hibiscus wine and bittersweet morbi. The most important rulers in Guyland, dressed in their finest cloth and jewels, stood to applaud the High Queen as she entered.
And I think that is the first reading that she has ever done of this forthcoming novel. So how exciting for us at Bocas. And now to something just as exciting, I'm going to invite Zalika to read to us from River Mumma.
Sorry, I had it like bookmarked, and now I can't find my bookmark.
I'll use the time to say we would love to ask questions as well after my questions. So if anybody can think of any questions, save them to the end and we'll come to you.
Before I begin, I just want to say I loved the description of food and everything, because I remember when I was younger and I would read fantasy novels and it would be all of these descriptions of like these European foods, and I was like, I feel like we can have descriptions of the food that I grew up with. So just hearing that, it was like my younger self was like, oh my God, this is amazing.
That was my younger self freaking out over food.
So I'm reading from River Mumma. Just a brief context of the book is that River Mumma comes to Toronto and tasks my main character, Alicia, with finding her comb in 24 hours because a tourist has stolen her comb. And Alicia and her two co-workers are going through this kind of quest through Toronto and trying to find the tourist and trying to find the comb. And so they end up finding the tourist at a hotel. So this is sort of not the confrontation, but things around the confrontation. They crossed the street to the hotel. Alicia had never thought the Royal York looked real. She thought it looked like one of those architectural models or an expensive collector's item maintained by the kind of wealthy men who built ships and bottles. It was the Chateau-esque hotel that loomed over the city, a limestone building of peaked green roofs and dormers and pointed arched windows, a historic site that overshadowed the modern skyscrapers around it. The large flags mounted above the entrance billowed in the wind, but Alicia's eyes went to the topmost roof, where a neon sign across the front spelled Fairmont Royal York in cursive. Even though night hadn't fallen yet, the sign was switched on, radiating a red light in the dark gray sky. She'd only ever stayed at the hotel once. In high school, she joined the prom committee and suggested the Fairmont as a venue. When the budget wouldn't allow for it, her mother eased her disappointment by booking her a room as a graduation present. She spent the 2 nights before Frosh Week in luxury, with room service, a king bed, and a view of the waterfront. They crossed the street and pushed through one of the revolving doors, walking up the steps to the main lobby. I feel like I walked into a Baz Luhrmann set, said Heaven. Alicia knew she was thinking of Gatsby. The lobby screamed Art Deco, the geometric sconces and chandeliers, the ornamental ceiling, the mosaic flooring, the jewel-toned furniture, even the golden-hued lighting made everything seem gilded and glam. Wreaths and garlands decorated the mezzanine above, and a brightly lit Christmas tree stood on a dais at one end of the entrance hall. Heaven looked around like she was decorating for her future house. People milled around in the bar by the clock tower or at the check-in, or they sat at the various benches and armchairs, but there weren't as many as Alicia expected for December. The lobby was fairly empty, so she didn't know why she heard chatter and laughing as if there were hundreds of guests. The clinking of ice and glasses, the shuffling of chairs, of feet. The music changed too. Instead of Jefferson Airplane, Grace Slick crooning about Red Queen from the bar, Alicia heard pianos and saxophones, trumpets and drums, loud like the band was playing right in front of her. She looked around, dread making her stomach squirm. Nothing she heard matched what she saw, until the room changed. Crystal chandeliers and ceiling drapery, marble pillars, and round and square tables beneath white tablecloths. Alicia found herself walking through an event hall full of people who weren't dressed for this time of day or this time of year or this year at all. The band was on a stage at the far end of the room. Women in evening gowns, satin or fringed, and men in black tuxes were together on the dance floor doing the foxtrot. Waiters in bow ties glided through the maze of tables, holding trays of drinks and tending to those who'd stayed seated. Alicia ambled through the spectral vision like she was the one who was a ghost, incongruous though invisible, until she reached the center of the room. The laughter and the music stopped without warning. The silence fell hard, and Alicia started to panic. Every single person in the ballroom turned sharply toward her, the quick movement in perfect unison. Everyone focused on her, their faces blank, their eyes glowing red, bringing back the memory of the rolling calf. Alicia's hand flew to her chest. "Leash, what are you doing in here? Elevators are that way." She turned and saw Mars behind her. Heaven looked nervous. She didn't realize she left the lobby and had walked into the Imperial room, which now had no one in it except for them. Heaven touched her shoulder. "Should we be worried?" Alicia looked around the hall and thought of Oni, how she protected herself from the history of University College with eggshells, a precaution to keep unwanted spirits at bay. The Fairmont was nearly a century old. Alicia was bound to run into some history that haunted it, and she had to get out before its ghosts attacked her. We should be quick. I'm just going to read one more part. They left the lounge, saying nothing else to Sydney, and waited for the elevator in the hallway. As they stepped through the doors, Alicia mulled over everything that had just happened. She knew they wanted to formulate some sort of game plan, but they'd have to wait until they left the hotel when the threat wasn't so high. Suddenly, the elevator plummeted down in free fall. Heaven stumbled backward and Mars swore, slamming his hand against the wall to brace himself. Alicia hurtled toward the button panel, pushing the red emergency button to no avail. She started smashing other buttons on the panel, but none of them lit up. The elevator jerked to an unceremonious stop, making Alicia and Heaven collide into Mars, pushing them face first into the wall. The door clanged open and they all toppled out onto the 8th floor, falling onto a lavish Victorian rug. Alicia hit her head on a lacquered table that displayed a potted plant, and Mars accidentally elbowed Heaven in the face. "Fuck, shit, my bad," said R.S. "You okay?" "I'm good, but Alicia, you're bleeding." She stood up gingerly, touching her head. "I'm fine." Suddenly, all the elevators dinged open at the same time, and a high-pitched drone sounded as the doors opened and closed like they were jammed. Before anyone could react, the power went out, swallowing the entire hallway in unnatural darkness. The exit signs illuminated the hallway in flickers of red light, the ruddy glow briefly exposing their expressions of dread and panic before the shadows obscured their faces again, like quick snapshots. In a flicker, a silhouette emerged, making them all jump. It was a gray-haired man with a gnarled face wearing a purple waistcoat, a ghost. Alicia thought its eyes were red, but it disappeared before she could be sure. Mars and Heaven stayed still, tensed and alert, and Alicia tried to make out as much as she could in the brief red glow produced by the exit sides. And then, the vase on the table hurtled toward them. Everyone ducked. As Alicia stood up again, the table came flying at them next, breaking apart when it landed on the floor. In the brief light, Alicia could make out the ghost seizing an armchair at the other side of the hallway, and they all ran the opposite way, the chair smashing into the wall just behind them. And then, I think I'll just leave it there.
So I love these novels individually, but as I was reading them, I was actually struck by the ways that they're in communication with each other, although you've written such completely different things. And I wanted to ask something that I'm always so interested in when it comes to SFF world building, because Zalika, you set your novel in the recognizable world where most, although not all, of the characters are surprised by the presence of the supernatural and surprised that a figure like River Mumma could exert all of this influence in Canada. And then Rhonda, you set your novel in this seemingly alien world, sort of ruled by these great magic users, although there might be more similarities to our world than you think. So I wanted to ask both of you, how do you go about creating these rich, complex worlds? Do you have a process of planning like very hard before you even start the book? Do you write yourselves into it? And Zalika, can I start with you, please?
Sure. So what was interesting is River Mumma came about because I was trying to write a high fantasy novel in a Caribbean inspired world. And but as I was writing that novel, there were a lot of things that were happening in Toronto at the time. A lot of conversation, particularly around Toronto slang, which uses a lot of Jamaican patois. And articles were saying that celebrities had like created this new slang, and then a bunch of Jamaican Canadians were like, no, That's not true. It's from us. And as this was happening, there was also a lot of articles about the millennial experience, the so-called millennial experience, but a lot of the articles I was reading or seeing were like white men saying, I'm proud of my white privilege, or there were a lot of like well-off people saying, I live at home and I travel and I do all of these different things. And I was like, that's not what that's not my perspective, that's not my experience. And so as this was happening and I was writing this fantasy novel, the two things sort of came together, and I decided to treat the millennial experience and treat Toronto as a fantastical world. And so the world building that I was trying to do, and it's really hard to do world building, I just kind of transplanted it onto Toronto, where I was like, I'm just gonna treat it like it is a magical universe. I'm gonna have a map at the beginning of the book, if they'll let me, and act as if my characters are going through Middle Earth. And I'm gonna have, you know, the fantastical and the spiritual with things like River Mumma and things like Duppies, but I'll also have their obstacles being the transit system and snow, and sort of mesh the two together. And so it kind of just came organically because of that, because it was born out of trying to do my own world and then just deciding I'm going to use that same logic for a real place.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Trinidadian, but I'm sure many of us can just understand like transportation being like a great evil, right? You're like trying to do a quest and like just the traffic or like public transport is stopping you. I was like, yes, this is true to my life too. But anyway, Rhonda, same question to you. How did you go about building the world?
So this is really interesting to me, because what I loved about what you were doing was precisely that you were taking these influences that we had and marking your own influence as diaspora onto it and bringing that into the contemporary world. That is one way. And it reminded me so much of what Nalo Hopkinson had done. Yeah. She's a huge influence for me. Same. I was 14 when I discovered her in my school library, and I opened a science fiction book, and there were people in it talking like me, looking like me, walking like me. I was like, what the? This is incredible. You mean we can do science? Because I want to do science, but I didn't know we could do science, you know? I came up in that age when, you know, if you didn't get 90% in maths, they told you, well, you know, you're a girl. You know, and I loved science, I loved math, I loved reading, I loved writing. I was weird that way. And I've been writing for a really long time, and everything inspires me. Everything about the world we live in inspires me. I felt so lucky to live in this place where we had all these different cultures and all these different peoples and this incredible history of, you know, it's dark and it's beautiful all at the same time. It's bloody and it's perseverance, and it was just, to me, epic. Really epic and huge. And I grew up hearing all these amazing stories from my grandparents and from my parents, and you know, I would read voraciously. And I realized that people outside seem to think that only, you know, Western society had epic stories. Only Western society had huge cultures that were going back and forth and influencing and thinking about deep things like gods and magic and, you know, technology and the intersection of these things. And I was like, well, hell no. We've been doing this for ages. I know, because I studied these books myself when I was in school, you know, and there were people who looked like me in it and talked like me in it. And I felt inspired by the idea after I saw Nalo Hopkinson of like, well, if we can do this with science, we can do this with everything. I can just be myself in everything. And world building is one of my favorite things to do, even though I am what I call a pantser, which is to say, I write from the seat of my pants. I am not one of those wonderful people, God bless you out there, who fill out your notebooks and you have a nice, you know, this is my introduction and this is how, and this is my inciting incident, and you know, this is the middle and the end. You probably get books done really, really efficiently. I don't. I sit down at the computer and I know how it's going to begin, and I know a little bit in the middle, and I know something, and I know the ending, and I just try to connect those things, you know? And when I'm done with the book, that's when I know, holy, this, oh, right, that's what I was trying to say. Okay, now I see what I'm doing. So I'm sort of a pantser and a gardener, which is another thing, this is another kind of approach, which is to say, there's this great garden, like a spot for it out there, and you can either lay out the seed beds and cultivate it from empty ground, or you can be like me and just walk into a huge patch of ground that has weeds and everything and just pull out stuff and go, oh, hey, these are nice flowers, let's work with these, you know, which is mostly what I do. So I start off from this viewpoint of me, myself, my culture. What do I love? What excites me? What things do I want to talk about? Because theme is really important to me. And I will say, okay, so there's somebody, there's a character, and I go from there. And the world reveals itself to me as I pull out the weeds, and I till the bed, and I make it look neat. And at the end of it, you come and you say, what a great garden. And I go, yeah, totally planned that.
I love how, in different ways, both of these books go into areas that are not in the traditional publishing world, Caribbean, because I think many people here will identify with both of what these authors said, you know, being maybe a young person reading stories, or even just not a young person, just a reader, and it seeming like certain genres were the province of particular areas, like often very Eurocentric, and like that's what it is. And I think that something that I used to think about sci-fi and fantasy years ago was that there were two different things. There's sci-fi and there's fantasy. And one of them is, you know, Lord of the Rings, you have my sword, and one of them is, you know, ships in space. But what I love about both of these novels is they bring together this sort of old magic, ancestral world with technology. And something that I wanted to ask is, do you see there as being this opposition between technology and old magic? And how did you approach bringing both technology and old magic into one book? And I think since we did Zalika last time, Rhonda, we can start with you.
I'm on the spot now. Okay, so it's interesting you say that. I will repeat something Karen Lord said earlier because it absolutely is true for me. And I mean, everybody says it. It's, you know, any sufficiently advanced civilization is indistinguishable from magic. You know, if you get your technology and you put it down in front of somebody who didn't invent that technology and didn't come into contact with it before, it looks like magic. You know, so in my mind, I've always approached what I write without boundaries. I don't particularly care for this is only sci-fi, this is only fantasy, whatever. Because the reality is those were marketing things that we created around the 70s. Prior to that, people just wrote books. And then people read the books and said, oh, I like that. Some of that was fantastical, you know? And we'd go, yeah. And we'd be fine with it. You know, the turn of the screw, Frankenstein, Dracula. We would be like, okay, some of these things have science and some of these things don't, it's fine. But then somewhere around the 80s or so, we started making little boxes. And it's because people like to sell things to people who think they only want to read one thing. I'm not that kind of person. I don't know any reader who only wants to read one thing, but okay. And they would give you, oh, this is sci-fi, this is fantasy, this is horror, this is for kids. What? I didn't even know that. I was there in the library, playing in all the shelves, pulling down whatever books people didn't stop me from reading. But we put these little boxes together. And the thing that I absolutely hated was being put into a box. I wanted to be able to honor the stories that I had heard when I was growing up, where you literally, I'm walking down the street, and Papa Boa said to me, what? Because we live our lives fully aware most of the time when you are from this culture, when you're from this region of the world, it's not that fantastical to think of things that you don't understand occurring to you in your daily life. It's not that fantastical to hear from a cousin, you know, I was down south the other day and I saw a red ball in the sky at night. Ooh, boy, you run, yeah? You weren't stopping to see, oh, it could have been a drone. No, in your mind, you know exactly what that was, and you wasn't getting sucked by no sukunya tonight. But the reality is there are two explanations. It could have been a drone, or it could have been a sukunya for real, and we live in a reality where either one of those things is fine as long as we got inside before we figured it out. You know? So when I approached this kind of writing, when I approached the fantastical, when I think about what it is I want to do, I don't limit myself like that. My favorite part of writing is being able to explore my imagination fully. And the fun I have a lot of times is how much science can I put in my magic? And how much magic can I put in my science? And the Nightward is literally the result of that. It's literally a result of thinking of some really big things and some really big ideas and all our culture and all the things we've undergone and the oppression we've suffered and the marginalization and the stories that help us survive and the people that underpinned our fight and made us who we are so that we can sit here today, you know, as a culture, as a people, in one of the most diverse nations in the world, talking to each other intellectually about what we saw, what we've been through, and what we'd like to see. And I said, I'm gonna put all of that, and I'm gonna tell a damn good story that also happens to be an epic. That doesn't have that many white people in it.
So for me, I actually didn't think of genre at all when I started writing this. And it also helped that I started writing this during lockdown. So I wasn't, it was keeping me sane, basically. But I came across Lorna Goodison's poem, The River Mumma Wants Out, which is actually at the beginning of this book. And she has a line in the poem where she says that, you know, River Mumma wants to leave the harbors of Kingston and she wants to experience snow. And I said, you know, Canada has snow, what if she came here? And that's basically how I started thinking about it. And then it sort of became about the diasporic experience, an experience that I had and my friends had about trying to speak to our family about things that we were told growing up but weren't really explained to us, and trying to connect back to our roots and to our culture and to our heritage. And then it became about how things are, you know, figures like River Mumma and figures like the Rolling Calf and Duppies were our heritage and past and spirituality that, you know, diasporic kids don't necessarily think about consciously but carry with us all the time. And then things, I guess, that would be considered like the technology and the phones that they were using to research while they're on this quest, and, you know, buses and things like that. That's what's presently in their lives, things that they're confronted with right then, and the two things are colliding, and that's basically what it's like to live, where you have your past and your heritage, and then you have the things that are happening right then with you. And the journey, you know, there's a physical journey throughout Toronto, but it's also just, you know, the spiritual and emotional and psychological journey that these characters are having with confronting these two things. And I wrote that just being like, this is what it's about. And then, you know, my editor and my publisher was just like, this is so great. What is it? Is it urban fantasy? Is it magical realism? And I was like, I don't know what it is. I just know that there's spirituality and there's duppies and there's things. You figure out what you want to call it. But I didn't really approach it from genre, because I think if I did, then I would be caught up in, oh my goodness, am I doing the conventions right? Am I doing the tropes right? And I don't want to be trapped by that. I just want to write what I feel. And so that becomes like a business decision that has nothing to do with me later on.
I totally agree with that, by the way. Let the marketing people sort that out. One of my favorite things in the world is to take tropes and turn them on their head. I freaking love that. That's, you know, you have a chosen one, and it's always some little boy farmer somewhere, you know? And he's like, oh, I'm the son of the king. Oh, goodness, that's amazing, you know? And in my work, I love to make it, oh, some young girl somewhere.
For sure.
Like, oh, I'm the son of the queen. Oh, wait, no, I'm the girl of the queen.
And for me as well, because, you know, there is the YA trope of a quest, and I was like, you mean 20-year-olds can't go on quests too? They can't be chosen ones? I think they can be 25 and they can be chosen.
Exactly, right? So why do we all think that, you know, only the teenagers can go on quests? Exactly. Most of us are searching for ourselves till we die.
I love that. Like, I feel like I'm constantly on a quest. Like now in my 30s, like I'm still on a quest, many quests. And I love that both of you have these, you know, epic quests where the fate of the world hangs in the balance. And in both of these books, there is this like ancient evil in different ways, but this ancient evil. And I think that, you know, even just for us in the Caribbean, our past holds so many evils. I mean, colonialism is recent, so I don't think it's like this ancient evil. We have, you know, people still alive who remember things, but we have this sort of generational trauma. We have, you know, things in like way in the past, hundreds of years ago, and recent history, and I was really interested in how both of the books held that in such very different ways. And I wanted to talk to you about how do you write these ancient evils, because it is both, like you said, a fantasy trope, but the way it's handled is not the sort of typical, you know, yes, Sauron. Also, to me anyway, really touches on generational trauma and historical trauma, and how even if you haven't experienced something directly, it could be in your bloodline, in your family line, in your generational memory. So I guess we'll start with Rhonda. Do you want to tell us about how you dealt with that?
Yeah, because that is a big thing for me. I love exploring that. I particularly love playing with memory. My first book literally was about an amnesiac. And in this one, I was thinking about what if everybody had a certain amount of amnesia, you know? It'll come to you when you read the book, you'll figure it out. But we tell ourselves stories, right? As cultures and as a people, we tell ourselves stories, and we remember certain things really, really well. And then other things that we don't want to remember, or other things that contradict the story we want to tell ourselves, we just forget. We just put it aside. We just act like it never happened. We just close the book, you know? And in this novel, basically, there's this book. And when you open that book, a whole host of things that people have put aside and have forgotten for a good damn reason is open for other people to find out about again. But is it a good reason? Or is it a bad reason? Who gets to decide? You know? It's really, really interesting to me that the villains are usually ourselves. We usually start fighting what's best or worst for us, but that's an individual decision, right? Sometimes you can clearly see this is best for everyone, or you think you can clearly see this is best for everyone. And sometimes someone has to say, this is what we're going to do. And this is why we appoint leaders, and even though we have a consensus, we get together, we vote, we have a council, whatever, but then one person gets to actually do the thing, you know? And so the book is basically about the person that has to do the thing. And then what did that mean for everybody else who didn't get to have an argument over that, who didn't get to give a consensus about that, and how you deal with that generational trauma from that, and how that continues on, how you sometimes feel the ramifications of what other people decided a long time ago still impacting you today in ways that you're like, hold up, wait a minute, I should not be going through this. I don't have any responsibility for this. Why is this happening to me? And it's because of the stories we tell ourselves and the stories we don't tell ourselves, you know? So that's really interesting to me. I love playing with that. I love playing with memory, and I'm just a storyteller at heart. I grew up listening to folk tales, and my favorite was Paul King Douglas, you know? And he was part of my education. And some of this book and a lot of my work is a homage to those storytellers and those folk tales and those people who hold our memories and hold the stuff that we want to remember, you know? And the rest of the book is basically me exploring what it is we were trying to forget.
So just before we come to Zalika, after this, I'm coming to you guys for questions. So I'm just giving you like couple minutes to think of your questions. I know a couple people in the audience. I'm not averse to calling them if no one has a question. I see some people looking at me and just saying, don't do it. So, I'm just giving you guys the heads up. But before that, Zalika, the same question.
So for me, when I approached this book, I was actually looking at it about what people pass on without realizing it, and not necessarily trauma. So because it was about, my main character, she has sight, and her grandmother has sight, and then it became about things around spirituality, things about traditional medicine that survive colonialism and survive demonization, that go passed down and even go across countries, but you don't necessarily know about it. But because of that, because it was about the things that survived, then I had to think about what destroyed those things. And so I couldn't really think about this sense of inheritance of history, the sense of inheritance of gifts, of powers, without thinking of the fact that enslavement existed and colonialism existed. And so if I'm thinking about that, then I also think about the scars that passed down, and then I have to think about the fact that it's not the full story, because certain things get lost or certain things get hidden, or grandparents, aunts, mothers, uncles, they don't want to talk about it. And so then a lot of the story became about my characters being like, why don't they want to talk about it? What are we missing? Having to go back and research, and then finding out things about themselves through academic papers that are not necessarily the full story, because maybe they're not even written by people who are from that culture. And so having to sort of, explore that with themselves and put their pieces together. It's like, okay, what did your family say? This is what my family said. And then, meeting someone who's actually from the island and then talking to them about it, who actually has grew up with all of these different things, and putting them together. And because of that, that's also, there are certain parts of my book where my main character goes to the past, and she sort of, she has visions, and she sort of meets her ancestors, and they don't necessarily have conversations, but it informs a lot about her. And within these visions that she has, there's a lot of resistance, there's a lot of survival, there's a lot of resilience, there's a lot of strength, there's also a lot of humanity, there's a lot of death, there's a lot of sadness. And so I think I was just looking at it as a holistic approach, where it was just to be a Black person, to be a Black woman, to be a Black woman who come from the Caribbean, who come from the continent, there is going to be pain, as well as there's going to be historical pain, as well as there's going to be historical strength and resilience, and that's just a part of life. And so I think that's how I just approached the book, where it's like, this is just about someone's life, and I'm trying to do as much of the whole picture in the span of 24 hours and 262 pages as much as I can. And so the intergenerational trauma and the intergenerational stories just came with that.
Yeah, because I love that you said that, because it really is about the search for yourself in your life. Like, the fact that you have all of this past and all of this family and everything, that's one thing, but then you have to figure out your place in things, right?
Exactly.
And we are all such a people interrupted. All of us, we're people interrupted. We've been taken from homes and cultures, and we have been forged through force, through violence, through necessity, into something completely different and new that doesn't quite fit where we came from, and doesn't quite fit, we think, where we end up sometimes even, But we're still here, we're still real, we're still persevering, we're still being ourselves. And simply because we're a people interrupted does not mean we are not a people who know who the hell we are, and who enjoy who we are, and who have something to offer that is special and different and wonderful. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I love it. And yes, I saw some people in that sort of like giving the little mini clap. All right, so I am so excited to go out to you for questions. If anyone has got a question, please put your hand up and we will bring the mic to you.
Hi. I wanted to ask a question, because I love mermaid lore, about the River Mumma, and like, if you always had a thing for mermaids, or like other stories of mermaids, or was particularly just the River Mumma?
For me, it was more about water. I had a thing about water. I actually had to do a talk about genre, and I went back to my old email accounts and looked up like the stories that I wrote when I was 12, and I would not recommend that. But a lot of it was about underwater beings or underwater worlds, and I kind of I think naturally, because of what I was seeing and what I was reading, I sort of pulled from Eurocentric, you know, folklore and mythology when I was younger, but it was really interesting going through my account and seeing the older I got, the more that it became about River Mumma, the more it became about Mami Watsa, the more it became about the things that I grew up with. And I was like, oh yeah, I can see the progression for me and how River Mumma came to be, because I think I realized that I subconsciously write for my younger self. And I've always wanted to write this book, and it just came to be that River Mumma was the perfect avenue to explore my love of water with that.
Yeah, I have to agree with that one. Water is a big thing for me, a huge theme for me. And as I grew older and I found out about Mami Water and Mama Blue, and it hit home for me in a completely different way, that this is part of my people. This is part of our journey. We came over water. You know what I mean? Some of us never left the water. But I definitely very much always liked mermaids, any kind of mermaid story. But my favorite stories were like sirens, because I like the idea of people calling these wicked men onto the caves and letting them die. I was like, yeah, crash and die. Go ahead, Odysseus. Get
so
lost.
I think Lisa had a question, and then there's one behind as well.
Good afternoon, everybody, and congratulations to you both. It wasn't a question so much as an observation that Caribbean women, water spirits, water goddesses, are kind of having a moment. We had Mermaid of Black Conch. We have you. We had Shakira's book with the So yeah, I mean, I don't know whoever she is, yay. But but I think that that connection that is also flipped in our connection to the Atlantic in general.
Yeah, I agree.
You know, and I guess part of what we're working out as a people, as you said, you know,
Yeah.
is this whole, you know, our mothers are buried
Yeah,
at the bottom of the sea.
One of the things that I wrote a few years ago, actually it was during the pandemic, was a story called Fire in His Eyes, Blood on His Teeth. And it was basically about an indigenous woman who is basically seduced by what I think of as the devil as a white man then. It's a pirate, you know? And she's subsumed by this person and thinks it's love, but it's of course an abusive, horrible relationship. And how does she break out of it is with the help with Mami Water and fairy maids. And fairy maids are a Tobago version of mermaids. And I was really, really interested in fairy maids in particular, because unlike most mermaid stories, which are about elusive, beautiful creatures, you know, and sometimes, you know, men chase them and they die chasing them, fairy maids are actively, I don't give a damn about you, and if I see you, I'm gonna drag you down to the depths. And so I was like, these are my kind of chicks. And I'm gonna write an homage to them. You know? And that kind of influence is because, yeah, sometimes you wanna take that thing that happened to you, that trauma that happened to you, you wanna flip it on the head, you wanna get vengeance, you wanna get revenge, you wanna work it out that way, you know? I'm a big proponent of that.
I am a big proponent of a hugely engaged audience, and I've noticed like the mic is passing, like people are like on it. So there is a question, and the lady, she already has the mic.
I do. Good evening. Good afternoon, sorry. My name is Carol, and I have read your book, Zalika, and I absolutely loved it. And the question that I have is, and I also love mermaids and write about them as well. And the question has kind of been answered a little bit, but, you know, we talk a lot about how not seeing ourselves in certain types of literature, but at the same time, you know, we don't want to kind of just take what's there and just make it Caribbean, right? And I haven't read your book, Rhonda. Hasn't come out yet.
It's coming out in October.
Yeah, I actually just like put it on my wish list. So
thank you.
You're very welcome. But yeah, so I think you do this successfully by a number of choices. And as an author, I really do hate to be asked questions about, well, what were you thinking when you did this? Because most of the times you're not, right? But at any rate, what do you think that you both did successfully in terms of making this not just sci-fi with a Caribbean twist, but really realistically something that's genuinely and inherently and authentically Caribbean that is also fantasy? And, you know, what you were saying about, you know, the mermaids being different, you know, because in your book, you know, River Mumma, she's in Canada. I won't give away too much, you know, but she's very modern, and she really does not give two hoots about what anybody else or about, you know, attracting anybody or anything like that. But like, what do you think we can do, or it looks like, you know?
I think for me, it's rooted in character. And so my characters were of Jamaican heritage. And so I was like, what makes sense for these characters? And then it also became about, if me and my friends were on a quest in Toronto, what would we act like? What would we be like? And so that in terms of just like capturing that aspect of it, but in terms of like River Mumma herself, I did do a lot of research, I did do a lot of like, you know, reading, but I also spoke to a lot of family members, and they all had very different versions of what she was. And my grandmother, I always tell this story, I spoke to her every day, and every day she had a different version of her. And I was just like, it's not what you said yesterday. And she's like, that was yesterday. And I was like, I don't know. And I basically took that because it's oral history. And so I was just like, then I'm gonna make her ever changing. She's gonna be completely different every time you see her. She's gonna look different, she's gonna act different. And one of the great things about River Mumma, depending on who you speak to, is she can be benevolent, and she can be, you know, lovely, or she can be vengeful. And so I was just like, yeah, I want it to be this sort of kind of like ever-changing, like water itself, where Alicia doesn't know how to approach her, because sometimes she can be very maternal, but if Alicia steps out of line, you know, River Mumma might turn on her. And that's also sort of how I approach the women in my family, where I'm like, I'll say the wrong thing, and then I'm like, oh, sorry. So I just think about the women in my life as well, and I just put them into the story, and I think that's how the authenticity of it being a very, you know, Caribbean, Jamaican, Toronto book came from.
So I think that I remember like on one of those shows like Chopped, they said like a good dessert always leaves you wanting more. I think a good panel always leaves you wanting more. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of your questions, but our writers will be available to sign their books at the signing table outside, or they both seem like very nice people to have a word if you didn't get your question answered. Please give them a couple minutes to get to the tables. Books by all our festival writers are available at the atrium. Next, right here, they don't write them like they used to. Marina Salandi Brown leads a discussion on the present and future of the newspaper column. All that's left is for me to thank our brilliant writers, Zalika and Rhonda.
I just want to make a quick statement. Unfortunately, my books did not arrive in time, so you won't be able to get signed books from me, but I'm perfectly willing to talk to anyone because I'm a writer and I want to talk your ear off. But also, if you are so inclined, you can just pre-order my next book, The Nightward, which is coming out on October 15th from Harper Voyager US. And it's available from every single outlet you can think of.
And thank you to all of you for being such a wonderful audience.